Why do so many relationships struggle, even when both people genuinely love each other? What if the biggest source of conflict between men and women isn't a lack of love, but a lack of understanding? In the groundbreaking book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, John Gray reveals a powerful idea. Men and women often think, communicate, and respond to emotions in completely different ways. These differences can create frustration, arguments, and misunderstandings, but they can also become the key to stronger, happier relationships when you learn how to navigate them. In this audiobook summary, you will discover why men tend to withdraw during stress, why women often seek connection through conversation, how emotional needs differ between the sexes, and the practical communication strategies that can transform your relationships. Whether you're single, dating, married, or simply want to understand people better, the lessons in this book can help you build deeper connections and avoid common relationship mistakes. Stay until the end, because the insights you'll learn today could completely change the way you communicate, resolve conflicts, and create lasting love in every important relationship in your life. What if many of the arguments, frustrations, and misunderstandings in relationships happen not because people don't care about each other, but because they naturally see the world differently? This is the powerful idea that John Gray introduces in Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He uses a memorable metaphor. Imagine that men came from Mars and women came from Venus. On their own planets, they developed different ways of thinking, communicating, solving problems, and expressing emotions. When they eventually met and fell in love, these differences seemed fascinating and attractive. But over time, they forgot that they were essentially speaking different emotional languages, and conflict began to replace understanding. Think about a common real-life situation. A woman comes home after a difficult day and wants to talk about her frustrations. She isn't necessarily looking for solutions. She simply wants someone to listen and understand her feelings. However, her partner immediately starts offering advice and suggesting fixes. From his perspective, he is being helpful and caring. From her perspective, she feels unheard and misunderstood. Both people have good intentions, yet both leave the conversation frustrated. According to Gray, this happens because men often show love by solving problems, while women often show love by sharing and connecting emotionally. The chapter encourages us to stop assuming that our partner should think, feel, or react exactly as we do. Instead of labeling differences as flaws, we can view them as natural variations in how people experience the world. Imagine how many conflicts could be avoided if, before reacting, we simply asked ourselves, could my partner be seeing this situation differently than I am? That single question can create space for empathy and understanding. The deeper lesson is that successful relationships are not built by finding someone exactly like us. They are built by learning to appreciate and respect differences. When we stop expecting others to communicate the way we do, we become better listeners, more patient partners, and more effective communicators. The next time someone close to you responds in a way that seems confusing, pause and consider whether you are expecting them to operate according to your own emotional rules rather than theirs. Reflect for a moment. How often do you assume that others should react the same way you would? Have you ever tried to help someone when they simply wanted to be heard? Are there recurring conflicts in your relationships that might be explained by differences in communication styles rather than a lack of love or respect? Main points. The central idea of this chapter is that men and women often have different emotional needs, communication styles, and ways of handling challenges. Many relationship conflicts arise from misunderstanding these differences rather than from bad intentions. The actionable lesson is to become more curious and less judgmental when disagreements occur. Practice listening before offering solutions. Seek to understand before trying to be understood. And remember that different does not mean wrong. By recognizing and respecting these differences, you can build stronger, healthier, and more fulfilling relationships. In this chapter, John Gray introduces one of the most common sources of frustration in relationships: the difference between wanting to solve a problem and wanting to talk about it. He explains that many men are naturally drawn to what he calls a Mr. Fix-It mindset. When they hear about a problem, their instinct is to find a solution as quickly as possible. To them, offering advice is a way of showing love, competence, and support. Women, on the other hand, often belong to what Gray humorously calls a home improvement committee. They tend to notice areas that could be improved and frequently express their thoughts and feelings about them. However, when they talk about a problem, they are not always asking for a solution. Often, They simply want empathy, understanding, and someone who will listen. Imagine a wife saying, "I've had such a stressful day at work. Nothing seems to be going right." Her husband immediately responds, "Why don't you talk to your manager and change your schedule?" From his perspective, he is being helpful. He sees a problem and offers a practical solution. But instead of feeling supported, she becomes irritated because she wasn't looking for advice. She simply wanted someone to acknowledge her feelings and say, "That sounds really difficult. Tell me more about it." What started as an attempt to help ends up creating distance because both people misunderstand each other's intentions. Gray points out that this pattern appears in countless relationships. Men often feel unappreciated when their advice is ignored, while women feel unheard when their emotions are met with solutions instead of understanding. The irony is that both partners are usually trying to express love, but they are speaking different emotional languages. The husband thinks, "I'm helping." The wife thinks, "is not listening." Neither person is wrong, but both are missing what the other truly needs. The chapter encourages readers to become more aware of these habits. Men can learn that sometimes the most supportive response is not a solution, but a listening ear. Women can learn that when men offer advice, it is often their way of showing care rather than dismissing feelings. Imagine how different a conversation would be if both partners understood this. Instead of becoming defensive, they could recognize the good intentions behind each other's behavior and respond with greater patience. As you reflect on this idea, ask yourself, when someone shares a problem with you, do you immediately jump into solution mode? Or do you take the time to understand how they feel first? Have there been moments when you felt misunderstood because someone tried to fix your problem instead of listening to it? How might your relationships improve if you became more aware of the difference between helping and understanding? Main points. This chapter teaches that men often express love by solving problems, while women often seek emotional connection through sharing their experiences. Many relationship conflicts arise when advice is given when empathy is needed. The key lesson is to understand what the other person is actually looking for before responding. If someone shares a problem, pause and ask yourself whether they need a solution or simply a listener. Practice listening without immediately offering advice, and appreciate that different communication styles are often expressions of care rather than signs of indifference. By understanding this distinction, you can reduce misunderstandings and create deeper emotional connections in your relationships. Have you ever noticed that when life becomes stressful, some people become quiet and distant, while others feel an even stronger need to talk? According to John Gray, this difference is one of the biggest sources of misunderstanding in relationships. In this chapter, he explains that when men face problems, they often retreat into what he calls their cave, a private mental space where they can think, analyze, and solve problems on their own. Women, however, tend to process stress differently. When they are upset, they often feel better by talking to their feelings, sharing their experiences, and connecting with others. Neither approach is wrong, but when these different coping styles collide, confusion and conflict can quickly follow. Imagine a husband who has just had a difficult day at work. He comes home, sits quietly, and spends time alone watching television or scrolling through his phone. His intention is not to ignore his partner. He is simply trying to process his stress and regain a sense of control. Meanwhile, his wife notices his silence and starts to worry. She may wonder if he is angry, upset with her, or losing interest in the relationship. The more distant he becomes, the more she wants to talk and reconnect. Unfortunately, the more she pushes the conversation, the more he feels pressured and retreats even further into his cave. What started as a normal response to stress can quickly turn into a cycle of misunderstanding. Gray explains that many men don't enter their cave because they don't care. They enter because they care deeply about solving the problem. They often feel uncomfortable discussing an issue before they have had time to think it through. Women, on the other hand, may not be looking for solutions when they talk. The act of sharing itself helps them process emotions and feel supported. Imagine a woman discussing every detail of a stressful day with a friend. She may already know the solution, but talking helps her gain clarity and emotional relief. If a man assumes she is asking for answers, he may interrupt with advice. If a woman assumes his silence means rejection, she may become hurt unnecessarily. Both are interpreting the situation through their own perspective rather than understanding the other's natural coping style. One of the most valuable lessons in this chapter is learning not to take these differences personally. If your partner becomes quiet during stressful times, it doesn't automatically mean they are upset with you. Likewise, if your partner wants to talk extensively about a problem, it doesn't necessarily mean they expect you to fix it. Understanding this simple distinction can prevent countless arguments and strengthen trust. Instead of reacting with frustration, you can respond with patience and understanding. Think about your own life for a moment. When you're facing a challenge, do you prefer to think about it alone or discuss it with someone you trust? Have you ever mistaken someone's need for space as rejection? Or have you ever felt dismissed because someone didn't want to talk when you did? How many relationship conflicts could have been avoided if both people understood that they simply cope with stress in different ways? Main points. This chapter teaches that men often handle stress by withdrawing into a cave where they can think and solve problems independently, while women often handle stress by talking through their feelings and seeking connection. These different coping styles can create misunderstandings when each person expects the other to react the same way they would. The actionable lesson is to respect your partner's natural response to stress. If someone needs space, don't immediately assume the worst. If someone wants to talk, focus on listening rather than fixing. By recognizing and honoring these differences, you can create more trust, reduce unnecessary conflict, and build a stronger, more understanding relationship. Have you ever wondered why the harder you try to motivate your partner, the less motivated they seem to become? John Gray argues that one of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships is assuming that what motivates them will also motivate their partner. In this chapter, he explains that men and women are often inspired by different emotional needs, and when those needs are misunderstood, both partners can end up feeling frustrated, unappreciated, and disconnected. Gray suggests that many men are motivated when they feel trusted, accepted, and appreciated. When a man feels that his efforts are noticed and valued, he naturally becomes more willing to contribute and support the relationship. Imagine a husband who spends an entire weekend fixing things around the house. If his partner focuses only on what still needs to be done, he may feel discouraged and unrecognized. However, if she sincerely acknowledges his effort and expresses appreciation, he is often inspired to do even more. The interesting paradox is that acceptance often creates more motivation than criticism ever could. Women, according to Gray, are often motivated when they feel cared for, understood, and cherished. Imagine a woman who has been managing work, family responsibilities, and countless daily tasks. If a partner notices her stress, listens to her concerns, and shows genuine care, she is likely to feel energized and emotionally connected. But if her feelings are dismissed or ignored, she may begin to feel isolated and unsupported. What motivates her is not necessarily advice or solutions, but the feeling that someone truly understands and values her experience. Consider a common scenario. A wife tells her husband that she feels overwhelmed with everything she has to do. The husband immediately responds by explaining how she could organize her schedule more efficiently. He believes he is helping, but she feels unheard. At the same time, the husband may be working hard to provide support in practical ways, yet if his efforts go unnoticed, he may feel that nothing he does is ever enough. Both partners want a better relationship, but each is trying to motivate the other using methods that work for themselves rather than methods that work for their partner. Gray's message is both simple and powerful. People thrive when their core emotional needs are met. Instead of trying to change your partner through criticism, pressure, or constant reminders, focus on creating an environment where they naturally want to give their best. Appreciation tends to inspire men, while caring and understanding tend to inspire women. When both partners feel emotionally supported, motivation becomes a natural result rather than something that must be forced. Take a moment to reflect on your own relationships. Do you tend to motivate others the way you personally like to be motivated? Have you ever focused more on what your partner was doing wrong than on what they were doing right? How might your relationships change if you spent more time meeting emotional needs and less time trying to correct behavior? Main points. This chapter teaches that men and women are often motivated by different emotional needs. Men tend to feel inspired when they experience trust, acceptance, and appreciation, while women often feel motivated when they experience caring, understanding, and emotional support. The key lesson is to stop assuming that your way of giving encouragement works for everyone. Instead, learn what makes the other person feel valued. Practice expressing genuine appreciation, listening with empathy, and recognizing efforts instead of focusing only on shortcomings. By meeting your partner's emotional needs, you can create a relationship where both people naturally feel motivated to give more, connect more deeply, and support each other more effectively. Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "That's not what I meant at all," only to discover that the other person completely misunderstood your intentions? According to John Gray, this happens so often in relationships because men and women frequently use the same words but attach different meanings, emotions, and expectations to them. In this chapter, Gray explains that it's almost as if men and women are speaking entirely different languages. They may be communicating in English, but emotionally they are operating from different dictionaries, which can lead to confusion, hurt feelings, and unnecessary conflict. Imagine a woman saying, "We never go out anymore." She may not literally mean never. Instead, she could be expressing a feeling of loneliness or desire for more quality time together. However, her partner hears a statement as a factual accusation and immediately starts defending himself. He responds, "That's not true. We went out 2 weeks ago." Suddenly, what began as a request for connection turns into an argument about facts. Neither person understands why the conversation is becoming tense because both are interpreting the words differently. Gray points out that women often use expressive language to communicate emotions, while men tend to interpret language more literally and focus on solving the issue being discussed. Consider another example. A woman says, "Nobody listens to me." In many cases, she isn't making a precise statement about every person in her life. She is expressing a moment of frustration and a desire to feel understood. A man, however, may immediately think, "That's not accurate. I listen to you all the time." He focuses on correcting the statement rather than recognizing the emotion behind it. As a result, she feels even more misunderstood, and he feels unfairly criticized. The chapter reveals that successful communication is not just about hearing words. It's about understanding the feelings and intentions hidden behind those words. Think of communication like translating a foreign language. If you only focus on the literal meaning, you'll miss the deeper message. When someone says something emotional, it can be helpful to ask, "What are they really trying to tell me?" rather than reacting to the exact wording. This simple shift can transform arguments into meaningful conversations. A hypothetical example makes this even clearer. Imagine a husband coming home after a long day, and his wife says, "You don't care about me anymore." If he reacts defensively and starts listing all the things he has done recently, the conflict will likely grow. But if he pauses and realizes that her statement may actually mean, "I miss feeling connected to you," he can respond with empathy instead of defense. The conversation immediately changes direction. Instead of proving who's right, both people begin addressing the real emotional issue. This chapter challenges us to become better translators in our relationships. Instead of assuming we know exactly what someone means, we can listen more deeply and look beyond the surface of their words. Reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever argued about the wording of a statement while completely missing the emotion behind it? Have you ever felt misunderstood because someone focused on your exact words rather than your feelings? What would happen if you spent more time trying to understand the message beneath the message? Main points. This chapter teaches that men and women often communicate differently and may attach different meanings to the same words. Many arguments occur because people react to the literal wording of a message instead of understanding the emotion behind it. The key lesson is to listen for feelings, not just facts. Before reacting defensively, ask yourself what the other person is truly trying to communicate. Practice clarifying rather than assuming. Focus on understanding emotions before correcting details, and remember that effective communication is about connection, not winning an argument. By becoming a better emotional translator, you can reduce misunderstandings and build stronger, more meaningful relationships. Have you ever felt like someone in a relationship suddenly becomes distant, only to return later as if nothing happened, leaving you confused about what just changed? In this chapter, John Gray uses a powerful metaphor to explain a common male behavior. Men are like rubber bands. They naturally move between two phases in relationships, closeness and distance. When a man feels emotionally connected, he tends to move closer, sharing time, affection, and attention. But after a while, he often feels an unconscious need to pull away, not because he is losing interest, but because he is trying to rediscover his independence, identity, and emotional balance. Imagine a couple who has been spending a lot of time together, enjoying conversations and feeling deeply connected. Suddenly, The man becomes quieter, less responsive, and seems emotionally distant. The woman may immediately assume something is wrong, perhaps thinking he is upset, uninterested, or even pulling away from a relationship. In reality, according to Gray, this withdrawal is not rejection but a natural process of emotional self-regulation. Like a rubber band stretching outward, he is creating distance so that he can eventually spring back with renewed energy and affection. However, if his partner interprets this distance as abandonment and reacts with pressure or anxiety, the cycle can become strained. Consider another real-life scenario. A man is deeply involved in a relationship and feels emotionally full. One weekend, he suddenly decides to spend time alone with friends, play games, or focus on personal hobbies. His partner feels confused and begins to question whether she has done something wrong. She may try to reach out more frequently, seeking reassurance. However, the more she pushes for closeness during his withdrawal phase, the more overwhelmed he may feel, which can delay his return. The irony is that his distance is actually part of what allows him to come back with stronger emotional presence and appreciation. Gray explains that this pattern is not about inconsistency or lack of love, but about emotional rhythm. Just as a rubber band loses its tension when stretched and returns to its original form when released, men often need cycles of closeness and independence to maintain emotional health. The challenge in relationships arises when this natural cycle is misunderstood. Women may interpret distance as emotional loss, while men may feel pressure when their need for space is misinterpreted as rejection. The key insight is learning not to personalize these shifts. Instead of reacting with fear or frustration, it helps to recognize that temporary distance can be a natural part of emotional processing. Imagine how different a relationship would feel if both partners understood this rhythm. The woman could use a time of distance to focus on her own interests, friendships, and emotional well-being, while the man would feel safe returning without guilt or pressure. This creates a healthier balance where both individuals feel free and connected at the same time. Now reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever mistaken someone's need for space as a sign of disinterest? Have you ever felt pressured when you simply needed time alone to reset your thoughts? How might your relationships change if you trusted that temporary distance does not mean permanent separation? And how could you respond differently the next time someone you care about pulls away emotionally? Main points. This chapter explains that men often experience a natural cycle of emotional closeness and withdrawal, similar to a rubber band stretching and returning. This distance is not a sign of losing love, but a way of restoring emotional balance and independence. Misunderstandings happen when partners interpret this withdrawal as rejection instead of a normal emotional rhythm. The key lesson is to avoid overreacting during periods of distance, give space without assuming the worst, and trust the return process. By respecting this cycle, both partners can maintain healthier emotional boundaries, reduce unnecessary anxiety, and strengthen long-term connection. Have you ever noticed that emotions in relationships don't stay the same for long, but instead rise and fall like tides that seem to come and go on their own? In this chapter, John Gray explains that women are like waves, constantly moving through cycles of emotional ups and downs. At times, a woman may feel confident, loving, and deeply connected, while at other moments she may suddenly feel overwhelmed, sensitive, or distant without any obvious reason. These emotional shifts are not random or irrational, but natural cycles of emotional release and renewal. Just like ocean waves rise, reach a peak, and then gently fall back into calm, emotional energy in women often flows in similar rhythms. Imagine a woman who wakes up feeling positive and energetic, excited about her day and her relationships. Later in the afternoon, after dealing with work pressure, responsibilities, and emotional strain, she suddenly feels low and irritable. Her partner may become confused, thinking something must have gone wrong in the relationship. He might start asking, "What did I do?" or try to fix a situation immediately. However, according to Gray, nothing necessarily went wrong. She is simply in a different emotional phase, and what she needs in that moment is not solutions but understanding and emotional presence. Consider another situation. A woman expresses frustration about multiple things at once, from work stress to small household issues. Her partner listens but quickly tries to separate each problem and offer practical fixes. While his intention is helpful, she may feel even more overwhelmed because her emotional wave has not been acknowledged, only analyzed. What she often needs first is someone to say, "I understand this feels like a lot right now," rather than immediately breaking everything into logical steps. Once she feels emotionally supported, her wave naturally begins to settle and clarity returns on its own. Gray explains that these emotional waves are not weaknesses but a form of emotional processing. Just as waves in the ocean are necessary for balance and movement, emotional fluctuations allow women to release stress and reconnect with their inner stability. The challenge in relationships arises when these natural shifts are misunderstood. A partner may assume that a low emotional phase means dissatisfaction with the relationship, when in reality it is simply a temporary emotional state that will pass if it is handled with patience and care. The important lesson is learning not to resist or fear these emotional waves, but to understand them. Imagine how different a relationship could be if both partners recognize that emotional highs and lows are part of a natural rhythm rather than signals of crisis. Instead of reacting with anxiety or trying to fix every emotional dip, a partner could respond with calm presence and reassurance. This creates a safe emotional space where feelings are allowed to move freely without judgment. Now think about your own relationships. Have you ever misinterpreted someone's emotional shift as a personal issue rather than a natural mood change? Have you ever tried to solve emotions instead of simply supporting them? How would your interactions change if you allowed emotions to rise and fall without taking them personally? And what would happen if you focus more on emotional presence rather than emotional control? Main points. This chapter teaches that women often experience emotions in natural cycles, similar to waves that rise and fall over time. These emotional shifts are part of emotional processing rather than signs of instability or relationship problems. Misunderstandings occur when partners try to fix or analyze emotions instead of simply acknowledging them. The key lesson is to practice emotional acceptance, offer support without immediately trying to solve problems, and recognize that emotional lows are temporary phases. By respecting emotional waves instead of resisting them, relationships become more patient, supportive, and emotionally secure. Have you ever felt like you are giving your best in a relationship, yet somehow the other person still feels unsatisfied or misunderstood? In this chapter, John Gray explains that one of the deepest reasons for relationship confusion is that men and women often have very different emotional needs, and they rarely express them in the same way. The problem is not a lack of love or effort, but a mismatch in understanding what actually makes each person feel valued, secure, and emotionally fulfilled. Imagine a man who believes he is showing love by working long hours, paying bills, and solving practical problems. From his perspective, he is providing everything necessary for a stable and secure relationship. However, his partner may not feel emotionally fulfilled because what she truly needs is quality attention, emotional presence, and meaningful communication. When she tries to express this, he may respond by doing even more practical tasks, thinking he is improving the situation, while she continues to feel emotionally disconnected. Both are trying to show love, but they are speaking through completely different emotional priorities. Now consider the reverse situation. A woman may express love by offering emotional support, conversations, and constant connection. She may ask about his feelings, try to engage him in deeper conversations, and spend time sharing her emotional world. However, if his primary emotional need is appreciation, trust, and space, he may begin to feel overwhelmed or misunderstood. He might withdraw slightly, which she interprets as emotional distance, leading her to try even harder to connect. This creates a cycle where both partners are increasing effort, yet both feel less satisfied over time. Gray highlights that emotional needs are not universal formulas. They are deeply individual and often shaped by how men and women are socialized to give and receive love. For example, a man may feel most valued when his efforts are recognized and trusted, while a woman may feel most valued when she is listened to and emotionally supported without judgment. When these needs are not recognized, even genuine acts of love can feel empty or ineffective because they are not aligned with what the other person truly needs. Think about a real-life scenario. A couple is going through a busy week. The man assumes that taking care of responsibilities at home will make his partner feel loved. Meanwhile, she assumes that spending a few minutes talking deeply each evening will strengthen their bond. Both are putting in effort, but both are missing the emotional signal the other is sending. As a result, both feel unappreciated despite doing things out of love. The misunderstanding is not about effort, but about emotional direction. The key insight of this chapter is that love alone is not enough if it is not expressed in the language of the other person's emotional needs. Understanding what your partner truly values emotionally allows you to connect more deeply and avoid the frustration of feeling like your efforts are going unnoticed. Instead of assuming what should work, you begin asking, observing, and learning what actually makes the other person feel emotionally secure and appreciated. Now reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever felt like your efforts were not recognized, even though you were trying your best? Have you ever misunderstood your partner's actions because they were expressing love in a different way than you expected? What emotional needs might you be overlooking in your relationships right now? And how could your connections improve if you focus less on what you think is helpful and more on what the other person truly needs? Main points. This chapter teaches that men and women often have different emotional needs, and misunderstandings arise when love is expressed in ways that do not match those needs. Men often value trust, appreciation, and recognition of effort, while women often value emotional connection, listening, and understanding. The actionable lesson is to stop assuming that your way of giving love works for everyone. Instead, learn to identify what makes your partner feel valued and adjust your behavior accordingly. By aligning your actions with your partner's emotional needs, you can create stronger trust, deeper connection, and a more fulfilling relationship for both people. Have you ever found yourself in a simple conversation that suddenly turns into an argument, and later you struggle to remember how it escalated so quickly? In this chapter, John Gray explains that most arguments in relationships do not begin because of major issues, but because of small misunderstandings that are handled in emotionally mismatched ways. When men and women interpret words, tone, and intent differently, even neutral conversations can slowly turn into conflict without either person realizing it. Imagine a situation where a woman says, "You never help me with anything." From her perspective, she is expressing frustration in a moment of emotional overload, hoping to feel supported and understood. However, her partner hears the word never and immediately becomes defensive, thinking about all the times he has actually helped. He responds by listing everything he has done, trying to prove the statement wrong. Instead of resolving the emotional tension, the conversation becomes a debate about accuracy, and both people feel increasingly unheard. What began as a need for connection turns into a battle over facts. Now consider another scenario. A man comes home after a stressful day and remains quiet. His partner asks, "What's wrong?" But instead of simply sharing or acknowledging a concern, he replies, "Nothing." She senses distance and begins asking more questions, trying to understand what has changed. He feels pressured and withdraws further, believing he is being pushed when he just needs space. The more she tries to connect, the more he feels a need to pull away, and what started as concern turns into tension. Neither person intended conflict, but their different emotional responses created it. Gray explains that many arguments grow out of reacting too quickly instead of listening fully. Often, people respond to the surface meaning of words rather than the underlying emotion behind them. A statement like "you don't care about me" is rarely a literal accusation. It is usually an expression of feeling ignored or emotionally disconnected. Similarly, silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it is a form of internal processing. When these signals are misunderstood, partners begin defending themselves instead of understanding each other. The key to avoiding unnecessary arguments is slowing down the emotional reaction and shifting focus from winning to understanding. Instead of responding immediately to defend yourself, it helps to pause and ask what the other person is really feeling. For example, instead of saying "that's not true," a more effective response might be to acknowledge the emotion behind the statement and ask for clarity. This creates space for calm communication rather than escalation. Over time, this habit transforms how conflicts unfold, turning potential arguments into conversations. Think about your own relationships. How often do you respond to the exact words someone uses instead of the emotion behind them? Have you ever defended yourself so quickly that you miss what the other person was actually trying to express? What patterns of communication tend to trigger arguments in your life, even when the issue is small? And how might your relationships change if your first response was understanding instead of reaction? Main points. This chapter teaches that most arguments come from misunderstandings, not intentional conflict. People often react to the literal meaning of words instead of the emotional message behind them, which leads to defensiveness and escalation. The key lesson is to slow down responses, listen for emotions rather than just facts, and avoid immediate defensive reactions. By focusing on understanding instead of winning, you can prevent unnecessary arguments and create calmer, more constructive communication in your relationships. Have you ever felt like you are putting an effort in a relationship, yet somehow the other person still doesn't seem to notice or appreciate it the way you expected? In this chapter, John Gray introduces the idea that men and women often keep emotional scorecards in very different ways, which leads to frustration even when both partners are genuinely trying to make things work. The issue is not that people are not doing enough, but that what they are doing is not being recognized in the way it was intended. Imagine a man who spends a whole day working, fixing things at home, and taking care of responsibilities. In his mind, every task completed is like earning a point for the relationship. He believes he is showing love through action and contribution. However, when he comes home, his partner may not immediately acknowledge those efforts because she is focused on emotional connection rather than completed tasks. Instead, she might express that she feels lonely or that they haven't spent meaningful time together. The man may feel that nothing he does is being valued, while the woman may feel emotionally disconnected despite his hard work. Now consider the reverse situation. A woman spends time caring for her partner emotionally, listening to his concerns, and trying to create closeness through conversation and attention. In her mind, she is investing deeply into the relationship. However, if a partner does not recognize this emotional effort and instead focuses on practical outcomes or distractions, she may feel unappreciated. Both individuals are scoring points, but they are using completely different systems to measure value in the relationship. Gray explains that this invisible scorekeeping often becomes a silent source of resentment. People begin to think, I am doing so much, but it is never enough, because they assume their contribution should automatically be understood and valued in the same way they intend them. A simple example could be a partner who buys gifts to show love, while the other partner actually values quality time more than material expressions. The giver feels generous and loving, while the receiver still feels emotionally neglected. Neither is wrong, but both feel unseen. The chapter highlights that the solution is not to stop giving, but to start recognizing how the other person keeps score emotionally. Instead of assuming your actions are being understood, it becomes important to communicate and learn what actually makes your partner feel valued. A small change, like verbally acknowledging effort or expressing appreciation in the language your partner understands, can completely shift the emotional balance of the relationship. When people feel that their efforts are noticed in a meaningful way, motivation and connection naturally grow. Think about your own relationships. Have you ever felt unappreciated even though you were trying your best? Have you ever assumed your partner should automatically understand your effort without you expressing it clearly? Are you keeping score in a way your partner cannot even see or understand? And how might your relationship change if you started recognizing their efforts in the way they personally define appreciation? Main points. This chapter teaches that men and women often score contributions in relationships differently, with men focusing more on actions and achievements, while women often focus more on emotional connection and presence. Misunderstandings occur when each person assumes their efforts are being valued in the same way they intend them. The key lesson is to understand how your partner perceives value and to express appreciation in their emotional language. By recognizing and acknowledging each other's efforts in meaningful ways, couples can reduce resentment, increase appreciation, and build a stronger emotional connection. Have you ever tried to express something important in a relationship, only to feel like your message either turned into an argument or was completely misunderstood? In this chapter, John Gray explains that communicating difficult feelings is one of the most sensitive challenges in relationships because emotions are often intense, unclear, and easily misinterpreted. When people are hurt, disappointed, or frustrated, they rarely communicate in perfectly structured sentences. Instead, feelings come out in fragments, exaggerations, or emotional expressions that can sound more like blame than vulnerability. Imagine a situation where a woman says to her partner, "You never listen to me." In reality, she may not mean never in a literal sense. She is expressing accumulated frustration from moments when she felt ignored or emotionally disconnected. However, her partner hears the word never and immediately becomes defensive, recalling all the times he did listen. He responds by defending himself, which makes her feel even more unheard, and the conversation quickly escalates. What began as an attempt to share feelings turns into a cycle of accusation and defense. Now consider a different scenario. A man feels stressed and overwhelmed after a difficult day, but instead of expressing it clearly, he becomes quiet and distant. When his partner asks what is wrong, he replies, "Nothing." He believes he is protecting the relationship by not unloading his stress, but she senses emotional distance and begins to feel insecure. She keeps asking questions, trying to reconnect, while he withdraws further because he feels pressured. Both are trying to protect themselves emotionally, yet both end up feeling misunderstood and disconnected. Gray explains that the core issue in communicating difficult feelings is not the existence of emotions, but how they are expressed in moments of vulnerability. When people are emotionally triggered, their words often become distorted versions of their true feelings. Instead of saying, "I feel hurt when I don't feel heard," they might say, "You don't care about me." Instead of saying, "I need some space to process this," they might say, "Leave me alone." These expressions are not precise statements. They are emotional signals that need interpretation rather than immediate defense. The chapter suggests that one of the most powerful communication skills is learning to separate the emotion from the wording. Instead of reacting to the surface of the statement, it becomes important to listen for the underlying feeling. For example, if someone says something harsh in frustration, the goal is not to win the argument, but to understand the emotional pain behind it. A simple shift from reacting to responding with curiosity can completely change the direction of a conversation. Instead of escalating conflict, it opens a door to understanding. Think about your own life. Have you ever said something in anger that you didn't fully mean, only to regret how it was received? Have you ever heard a partner's words and focused more on defending yourself than understanding their feelings? What would change if you paused for a moment before responding to emotionally charged statements? And how might your relationships improve if you focus more on the feeling behind the words rather than the exact words themselves? Main points. This chapter teaches that communicating difficult feelings often lead to misunderstandings because emotions are expressed in imperfect and emotionally charged language. People tend to use absolute or exaggerated words when they are hurt, which can treat offensiveness instead of understanding. The key lesson is to listen for the underlying emotion rather than reacting to the literal words. By slowing down responses, focusing on feelings instead of accusations, and responding with empathy instead of defense, you can turn emotional conversations into opportunities for deeper understanding and stronger connection. Have you ever needed help in a relationship but felt disappointed when the other person didn't respond the way you expected, even though they might have cared deeply about you? In this chapter, John Gray explains that one of the most overlooked challenges in relationships is not the lack of support, but the way support is requested and understood. Many misunderstandings arise because people assume their partner should automatically know what they need, instead of clearly expressing it in a way that can be received and acted upon. Imagine a woman who feels overwhelmed with household responsibilities and expect her partner to notice her stress and step in to help. She becomes quieter, more irritated, and hopes he will understand without her having to say anything directly. Meanwhile, her partner assumes everything is fine because she hasn't clearly asked for help. As a result, he continues his routine, unaware that she is feeling burdened. Over time, she feels unsupported, while he feels confused about why she seems upset despite everything appearing normal on the surface. Now consider the reverse situation. A man is struggling with work pressure and financial stress, but does not openly express that he needs emotional reassurance or practical assistance. He may believe that talking about his problems will burden his partner, so he keeps it inside. His partner, sensing distance, may try to offer comfort in subtle ways, but without clear communication, her efforts may not match what he actually needs. This creates a gap where support exists in intention but not in understanding. Gray highlights that asking for support effectively requires clarity, timing, and emotional awareness. Instead of hinting, expecting, or testing, it is more effective to clearly express what you need in simple, direct language. For example, rather than saying, "You never help me," a more effective approach will be saying, "I feel overwhelmed right now and I would really appreciate your help with this specific task." When requests are clear, they become easy to respond to, and resentment is less likely to build on either side. The deeper insight is that people are often willing to help, but they are not mind readers. Support becomes meaningful when it is requested in a way that the other person can understand and act on without confusion or pressure. At the same time, being open to receiving support without guilt or hesitation is equally important, because it allows connection to flow in both directions. Healthy relationships are built not only on giving, but also on the ability to ask and receive clearly. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever needed help but avoided asking for it directly, expecting the other person to notice? Have you ever felt frustrated when someone didn't support you in the way you silently hoped for? Do you tend to express your needs clearly, or do you rely on indirect signals? And how might your relationships improve if you practiced asking for support in a simple, honest, and specific way? Main points. This chapter teaches that many relationship frustrations come from unclear or indirect requests for support rather than a lack of willingness to help. People often expect others to understand their needs without explicit communication, which leads to misunderstanding and resentment. The key lesson is to ask for support clearly, specifically, and without assumptions. By expressing needs directly, being open to receiving help, and avoiding indirect expectations, relationships become more cooperative, supportive, and emotionally balanced. Have you ever wondered why the excitement and emotional intensity that once felt effortless in a relationship slowly begins to fade, even when both people still care deeply for each other? In this chapter, John Gray explores the idea that keeping the magic of love alive is not about finding the perfect partner once, but about continuously nurturing emotional connection through awareness, effort, and understanding of changing emotional needs over time. Love, according to Gray, does not disappear suddenly. It weakens when couples stop speaking each other's emotional language and begin taking connection for granted. Imagine a couple in the early stages of their relationship. They naturally show curiosity toward each other, listen attentively, and appreciate small gestures. Over time, however, life becomes busy, responsibilities increase, and communication becomes more functional than emotional. The man may assume that providing stability, working hard, and handling responsibilities is enough to maintain love, while the woman may feel that emotional conversations and shared presence have reduced. Slowly, what once felt exciting begins to feel routine, not because love is gone, but because emotional attention has shifted elsewhere. Consider another scenario where a woman tries to reconnect emotionally after noticing distance in the relationship. She starts asking deeper questions, sharing feelings, and seeking quality time. Her partner, however, may respond by focusing on practical matters or assuming everything is fine because there are no obvious conflicts. As a result, she feels emotionally unseen, while he believes he is still fulfilling his role as a partner. Both are present in the relationship, but the emotional spark fades because they are no longer actively engaging in each other's emotional world. Gray explains that keeping love alive requires conscious effort to continue meeting emotional needs in ways that feel meaningful to the other person. Small actions, when done consistently with awareness, can have a powerful impact. For example, taking time to listen without distraction, expressing appreciation for everyday efforts, or simply acknowledging your partner's feelings can rebuild emotional closeness that may have weakened over time. The magic of love is not maintained through grand gestures alone, but through repeated moments of understanding, patience, and emotional presence. The deeper lesson is that relationships naturally evolve, and what worked at the beginning may not be enough later on. Emotional needs can shift, and partners must remain attentive to these changes rather than assuming that love will sustain itself automatically. Just as a plant needs regular care to stay alive, emotional connection requires ongoing attention. When couples stop nurturing this connection, distance can grow silently, even in relationships that appear stable on the surface. Think about your own relationship experiences. Have you ever noticed a time when emotional closeness gradually faded without a clear reason? Do you still make time to truly listen and understand your partner's inner world? Or has communication become mostly about tasks and routines? When was the last time you intentionally expressed appreciation or emotional presence without being prompted? And how might your relationship change if you treated emotional connection as something that needs daily care rather than occasional attention? Main points. This chapter teaches that the magic in love fades not because love disappears, but because emotional connection is no longer actively nurtured. Over time, couples may shift into routine interactions and neglect emotional needs, leading to distance and reduced intimacy. The key lesson is to consistently invest in emotional awareness, communication, and appreciation. By regularly listening, expressing gratitude, and adapting to changing emotional needs, couples can maintain closeness and keep the relationship emotionally alive and fulfilling over time. As we come to the end of this audiobook summary of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, remember the core lessons. Relationships improve when we understand that men and women often think, feel, and communicate differently. Arguments usually come from misunderstanding rather than lack of love. Emotional needs must be recognized instead of assumed. And lasting connection is built through empathy, clear communication, appreciation, and emotional awareness. If you apply even a few of these ideas in your daily life, you can transform the way you handle conflicts, express love, and connect with others on a deeper level. If you found value in this summary, subscribe to the channel Visual Books for more powerful book breakdowns, like the video to support the content, and comment which lesson you will start applying in your relationships first.